I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have the privilege of having the minister with us this morning, and we want to thank the committee for being here. We have the potential of being interrupted as we move into this meeting, but we will deal with that in due course. But we are here on the Standing Order 1082, a study on the positive effects of Global Markets Action Plan. And we have the minister here to answer any questions we might have, and we'll lead off with his presentation to committee, and then we'll get into question and answer. So welcome, Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, chers amis. And thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. I am joined by Susan Bicoletto, who's our Chief Trade Commissioner for Canada. I'm delighted that the committee has chosen to undertake a review of our government's Global Markets Action Plan. This morning, I would like to provide you with some background on this landmark plan and also fill in a few details. It's no secret to anyone here that Canada has been and remains a nation built on trade. We are one of the great free trading nations of the world. Trade is equivalent in size to some 60% of Canada's gross domestic product, and 1 out of every 5 Canadian jobs is related to exports. One of the first initiatives our government undertook to expand international trade for Canadian businesses was the Global Commerce Strategy. It was a comprehensive plan for expanding Canada's trade network, strengthening our competitive position in our traditional markets, and extending our reach to new emerging markets. The strategy generated significant success, helping to pave the way for our government to sign numerous trade agreements. But in a fiercely competitive global economy, Canada must remain nimble and agile. We must keep challenging ourselves. To do just that, our government's Economic Action Plan 2012 committed to building on the success of the Global Commerce Strategy by consulting extensively with Canada's business community to identify new markets, new strengths, and new opportunities. The result of our consultations is the Global Markets Action Plan, or GMAP as we call it. This plan, which I released at the end of last year, is Canada's new blueprint for creating jobs, economic growth, and opportunities for Canadians through international trade and investment. Under the GMAP, the Government of Canada will concentrate its efforts on the markets that hold the greatest promise for Canadian business and focus on the sectors of our economy which hold the greatest promise for export growth. We will do this through vigorous trade promotion and effective trade policy. As we concentrate on priority markets and sectors, the Global Markets Action Plan will also entrench the concept of economic diplomacy as a driving force behind the Government of Canada's trade promotion activities throughout its international diplomatic network. And let me be clear, placing economic diplomacy at the heart of our broader foreign policy plan is not in any way intended to undermine or compromise Canada's robust development and humanitarian programs or our peace and global security initiatives. But we do expect our government representatives abroad to promote all of Canada's values and interests, including our economic interests. At the forefront of these efforts is Canada's Trade Commissioner Service. These are Canada's trade professionals, posted across Canada and all around the world, executing the trade and investment promotion activities of the GMAP as a core component of our broader foreign policy plan. Our trade commissioners provide market intelligence, on-the-ground support, and act as troubleshooters in markets that Canadian companies are interested in exporting to. I recently announced that more than 25 trade commissioners will be embedded in industry associations across our country. Their role is to inform Canadian companies about the tools which our Canadian government has made available to them as they explore export interests around the world. Our embedded trade commissioners will also act as a bridge between businesses and government programs, policies, and agencies such as Export Development Canada, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and the Business Development Bank of Canada. Our embedded trade commissioners will also gain better insight into the evolving export needs of Canadian industries and ensure these needs are reflected in the services they provide to our businesses. Another trade promotion tool I want to touch on is the wide array of trade missions which our government leads to our priority markets. Sector-focused trade missions are one of the many ways our government supports Canadian companies, particularly SMEs, to explore and succeed in foreign markets. Trade missions are about opening doors, about finding partners, engaging with key decision makers, fostering long-term relationships, and identifying new trade and investment opportunities. In fact, I just completed a trade mission to China this last week. The mission was focused on the sustainable technologies industry, one of the priority sectors under the Global Markets Action Plan. And during that mission, I announced that we will open another 4 Canadian trade offices in China, bringing to 15 the total number of points of service Canada offers to Canadian exporters and investors in our second largest trade partner, that being China. Over 100 of Canada's trade commissioners will be deployed throughout China. In short, we are committed to aligning Canada's resources with our priority markets. And next month, I'll be leading a trade mission to South Africa and Tanzania with a special focus on the extractive sector, infrastructure, and renewable energy and power. Now, equally important to our trade strategy are incoming trade missions. This Sunday, I will be welcoming in Vancouver a delegation of my ASEAN ministerial counterparts and senior officials. We're very much looking forward to deepening our trade ties with our ASEAN friends. Those would be countries in Southeast Asia such as Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia. And we're looking forward to showcasing the very best of what Canada has to offer. I'm also pleased that business delegates from Turkey will be here in Canada next week. As you know, Turkey is also a priority market under the Global Markets Action Plan. Now, those incoming trade missions to Canada are among the tools we use to connect our SMEs to global markets. And just a note about small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. The GMAP recognizes that SMEs are the backbone of Canada's economy. We currently have somewhere in the order of 1 million SMEs in Canada, many with the capacity to export, but only about 40,000 of that 1 million currently export. The number that export beyond North America is even smaller, much smaller. So our goal under GMAP is to increase the number of SMEs that export into emerging markets from 11,000 to 21,000 companies. Now, I know that's a tall order, but these are the markets that today offer the greatest growth opportunities, and it is critical to our long-term prosperity that our SMEs step up to the plate and now begin to explore export opportunities beyond North America. The last pillar of the GMAP that I wanted to mention is our commitment to negotiating trade agreements with other countries. And not only trade agreements, investment agreements as well, that will free up trade between us and our key trading partners and provide more security and assurance for those in Canada that want to invest abroad. When our government first took office in 2006, Canada had concluded free trade agreements with only 5 countries. That's a short 8 years ago. Today we're approaching concluded trade agreements with 43 different countries, and there are many more to come. Last October, we signed the agreement in principle for a free trade agreement with the European Union. When that agreement comes into force, it will mean that Canadian exporters have preferential access to more than half of the entire global marketplace. As the world's largest trading bloc, the EU represents over $17 trillion in economic activity every year. The value of the EU's annual imports alone, exceeds Canada's total annual economic output. And in March, we also announced the successful conclusion of a free trade agreement with South Korea, Canada's first free trade agreement in Asia. This agreement will boost Canada's economy by $1.7 billion a year. And just as importantly, Canadian businesses will now be able to use Korea as a gateway to the larger, rapidly growing markets of Asia, where we're also pursuing free trade agreements with India, with Japan, and within the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, investment protection agreements are also important as they provide Canadian businesses with greater confidence and assurance when they invest abroad. 2 days ago, I announced the coming into force of the Canada-Benin Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, which is Canada's third in Africa. And that brings to 27 the number of bilateral investment treaties which Canada has in force around the world. In closing, I want to state that our government's ultimate goal is a world in which all can share in the prosperity, opportunity, and choice that international trade and investment deliver. The GMAP is Canada's contribution as we all work toward that goal. So thank you. Merci à tous. I welcome your questions, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much. You sound like you've been flying high and been very busy. It's very good. Impressive. Mr. Davies, the floor is yours as we open up questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being with us today. Welcome again to the committee. Minister, I want to commend you for your recent efforts to increase our trade presence in China. While we know that trade agreements can provide the framework opportunities to increase economic activities, as you have pointed out today, Trade Commission offices provide the real on-the-ground services that help Canadian businesses realize that potential and actually often make the sales. However, there are an increasing number of commentators, including the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, who point out that our Trade Commissioner staff have been under-resourced over the past 8 years. Cam Vidler, the Director of International Policy for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, told this committee 2 weeks ago, and I'll quote him, "The Trade Commissioner service is at the heart of Canada's economic diplomacy, and they need to have the resources and skills set to get the job done right. Despite rising service requests, budgets and staffing are at the same level as they were in 2007 and are set to stay flat for the foreseeable future." End quote. Given the vital role that trade commissioners play in realizing our trade ambitions, Mr. Minister, can you tell this committee why they're not receiving increased resources from your government?
Well, that's a good question, Mr. Davies. Let me answer that in two ways. First, our government has made a very clear commitment to Canadians that we will return to balanced budgets. And we are tracking to do that. That requires discipline. And we've been able to do that within a low-tax environment. We made a commitment to return to balanced budgets without increasing taxes on Canadians. We believe we are well on our way to achieving that. Within those constraints, we're, of course, looking to do more with less. In other words, we're trying to become more efficient and deploy our resources to those areas of the world where we get the biggest bang for the buck. Obviously, as required and as warranted going forward, we will always be looking forward to new opportunities to place additional resources in the markets that matter so that we can address the sectors that matter to the Canadian economy. But I can assure you that we are doing our very best within the current constraints that we have and the commitments we've made to Canadians to make sure that we deploy our Trade Commissioner resources in the most effective manner.
Thank you. Now, Minister, of course, Canada is in a competitive world, and many other countries are seeking to tap the very same markets that we are. So it's instructive, I think, to compare our investments in trade assets with our competitors. I'll quote the Canadian Chamber of Commerce again. Again, 2 weeks ago, they told our committee, quote, as a share of GDP, the United Kingdom now spends twice as much as Canada on its trade diplomats, end quote, and pointed out that Australia dedicates 50% more resources in trade promotion than does Canada. And the demand is clearly there. The recent Chamber of Commerce report elaborates on this, stating, and I'll quote again, recent developments suggest that resources are increasingly being spread thin. Much of this demand has come from emerging markets, the markets you referred to, Mr. Minister, where Trade Commissioner requests grew by 15% over the past year. In China and India, they have increased by 37% and 25% respectively. The target in the GMAP to double the presence of SME businesses in these markets by 2018 will only add to this pressure, end quote. So again, logically, the demand in our Trade Commissioner services, in their view, and ours, should be met with increased resources in order to ensure success. So are there any plans that you have to try to meet that increased demand with increased Trade Commissioner presence to realize that potential?
I think I've just answered that question, Mr. Davies, but what I will say is this. It's not just about how much money you spend. It's about how you utilize those resources. And as I've traveled around the world, I've visited dozens and dozens and dozens of our key trading partners, and I've had a chance to meet our trade commissioners on the ground. And I've also had a chance to meet thousands of their clients over the last 3 years. And I can tell you that the Trade Commissioner of Services Canada is admired all around the world. I believe it's the best tool of its kind in the world. We have received kudos for the work that our Trade Commissioners do in the field and the services that they deliver to Canadian companies on the ground. Is there more we can do? Of course there is. And as time goes by, we're going to make sure that we put the resources in the field that are required to maximize Canada's potential in terms of its export interests.
Thank you. Now, I just want to turn to SMEs for a moment, if I may, Mr. Minister. The Chamber of Commerce also pointed out in their report the shutting down of the Virtual Trade Commissioner Service, which was a streamlined one-stop shop online for Trade Commissioner services. And I also have spoken to many businesses and exporters who tell us that it's very helpful for them to have a one-stop shop, particularly SMEs who don't have big departments, they don't have the staff or the time or the resources to have presence in other markets. They want our government to provide them with a streamlined location, preferably online, where they can get the information they need to access those markets. And they say that this service, the Virtual Trade Commissioner service, was crucial for SMEs who find it, quote, difficult to navigate a trade promotion system, quote. The report of the Canadian Chamber went on to say, often these SMEs have to visit multiple websites and speak with several representatives in different departments before finding the relevant solution to their problem. This can be enough to deter them from seeking services in the future, end quote. Can you give us a brief explanation, Mr. Minister, of why the Virtual Trade Commissioner service was closed, if we really want to help SMEs tap export markets?
Well, thank you for that question. The Global Markets Action Plan, of course, has provided us with the perfect opportunity to reevaluate the programs we have, reevaluate the resources we have, gives us an opportunity to redeploy resources in a manner that drives a bigger bang for the buck when taxpayers invest. I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Bincoletto to sort of explain to you the rationale behind the Virtual Trade Commissioner Service and what we're doing.
Thank you, Minister. I should say that what we're trying to do is modernize the way we access SMEs. We are currently leveraging other government departments and organizations like EDC, CCC, and BDC, as well as NRC, which has they all dabble in the same space of working with small and medium-sized companies. And they have various websites and digital tools to connect with SMEs. And what we're doing through various MOUs is try to develop another frame so that we can provide a single or more comprehensive window to track what are the needs for SMEs. For example, there's a life cycle. Some need financing, some need contracting, some need contacts. And so by working better together, which is also something that the Chamber of Commerce has said, better coordination among government institutions. We're trying to work to have a better, easier, seamless face to help SMEs. So that's why it's a next phase to improve government resources for the benefit of SMEs.
Thank you very much. Mr. O'Toole, the floor is yours, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister and Ms. Bincoletto, for joining us here this morning. We appreciate your remarks, and we appreciate your efforts globally. Minister, I want to seize first on, you had a great breakdown of our government's focus on SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, 1 million, but only 40,000 exporting, and a vast majority of those only looking to the U.S. We heard a couple of weeks ago from Dr. Head from the University of British Columbia and Dr. Wright from York, who suggested that the growth of SMEs and their export opportunities was critical, and how the focus on SMEs as part of the Global Markets Action Plan was a profound departure from the past, where there was more of a scattergun approach taken to trade missions. Would you care to comment on how SMEs are particularly a part of the Global Markets Action Plan?
Yes, thank you for that question. We have realized quickly that our large Canadian companies, the multinationals, they have the resources to penetrate new markets. They have the resources to expand their presence in markets that matter. What we realized is that our Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises are woefully unaware of the tools that their federal government has made and continues to make available to them to actually be successful as they look for export opportunities outside of Canada and outside of North America. The Global Markets Action Plan actually recognizes that, and that's why there's such a special place in the GMAP for SMEs. They are going to drive much of our future export growth around the world, and that's why we want to make sure that we also develop a plan, which we're in the process of doing, to actually promote the tools that the federal government makes available, and by the way, that provincial governments make available as well, to SMEs, so that they can safely start to explore those new markets that they probably should have explored many years ago. I've long ago come to the conclusion that Canadian companies are highly risk-averse. They are very cautious, probably more so than companies in some of our key trading partners. And it takes quite something to push them over the line where they say, okay, I'm going to actually take that next step and start to explore these new markets and start to develop my export potential. And so I believe the Global Markets Action Plan is a very significant step in the right direction to do that. But it's not going to be only me as International Trade Minister and my ministerial colleagues and our MP colleagues that will be responsible for promoting those opportunities for SMEs. We're also going to work with the industry associations across Canada to make it very clear to them that we want them to be our partners as we communicate with our SMEs this incredible world of opportunity out there that they haven't yet tapped into.
Thank you. One thing I like coming from business about the Global Markets Action Plan is the prioritization, so that the priority, as you said, Minister, bigger bang for your buck. When you set priorities on countries and sectors and opportunities, whether it's a for-profit or non-profit, priorities and a strategic plan are critical. The same witnesses I quoted also said that the previous approach, there was very little follow-up and very little long-term impact from just a mission with a number of politicians, that sort of thing on it. Can you talk about how this allows a prioritization of economic, diplomatic, trade commissioner resources, like in China, as you said, the 15 trade offices that are now there, how that helps focus our spending and our priorities?
In the consultations that led up to us actually formulating the new Global Markets Action Plan, we were able to consult with virtually every industry association across Canada. We were able to consult directly with companies that had expressed interest in exporting, that are presently exporting, some of which haven't yet exported. And it very, very quickly became apparent that Canada's resources were being spread too thin. We needed to prioritize, and we did that. So in two key areas. One, we prioritized the markets that matter the most to Canada. If we expect that we want to be engaged fully in every country in the world, we just don't have the resources to do that, and we won't achieve success. So we've narrowed down the number of countries that are on our list of priorities, and there are typically countries in which either Canadian companies have already experienced success, there will be countries which have economies that are emerging, that are growing rapidly, or they may be countries to which we haven't had access but represent large markets. Like the European Union, we have now negotiated an agreement that for the first time will provide real access to Canadian companies that so far have been shut out of that market. And we've done the same thing then also in terms of the industry sectors. We want to make sure that we focus on the sectors in which Canada has real strength. And we've limited that number of sectors down to 22 key sectors, and that's where our trade promotion activities will be focused.
Thank you, Minister. My final question, you're the last of 12 witnesses we've heard from specifically on the Global Markets Action Plan. We've heard from dozens in the last few months on CITA, on TPP, and others. I'm looking here at an invitation to an event called The Panel that next week will explore economic diplomacy and Canada's Global Markets Action Plan. The only MP on the panel is Ms. Freeland, who is the Liberal trade critic, I understand, but has never attended a trade committee meeting, including our last few weeks on Global Markets Action Plan. We very much appreciate our participation from our friend, Mr. Bacchetti. But I'm wondering, has Ms. Freeland, as the trade critic for the Liberal Party, inquired or written your office with respect to the Global Markets Action Plan, or because she's appearing on a panel talking about it, but I haven't heard or she hasn't been hearing from Canadians on the plan itself?
Well, Mr. Toole, I do note that Mr. Bacchetti is a member of this committee, and from everything I've heard, he's been a very productive participant on this committee, and his input is valued. But you are correct that my trade critic actually has been notably absent, not only from this committee, but I have never once received a question from her in the House of Commons on trade. Not once. And I don't know why that is. I can tell you in terms of our government that we consider trade and investment to be the twin engines of economic growth for Canada. This will drive our long-term prosperity, which is why this government for the last 8 years has made trade such a priority for Canadians.
You're about to get the questioning from
Chairman, I just have a point of order. Point of order, briefly.
Okay.
The minister just said that he said my trade critic has not been. I think he meant to say the Liberal trade critic.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Mr. Bacchetti. The floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What a segue. So, yes, I am the Liberal member on this committee, and your colleagues around the table have decided I only have 5 minutes, so if you can try and keep your answers limited. I have a couple of questions, Mr. Fast. Thank you for coming, by the way. Appreciate it. I guess I just want to ask the question on the SMEs. I totally agree with SMEs not being able to have the opportunity to export for various reasons. I have, friends in accounting practice that has a lot of connections with small businesses, and the challenge is always the resources. It's whether it's financial and it's human. You spoke about, well, Ms. Bincoletto, you spoke about EDC and BDC working together, but my feeling is that as long as BDC is charging 4 or 5% extra for loans, EDC asking for extra paperwork, and then BDC asking for extra paperwork, small businesses are not going to start exporting, because it just means more resources that they're going to have to put out before they even get $1 back in profit or investment. Any comment, Mr. Fast?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned not only SMEs, but SMEs in the context of what Export Development Canada delivers. There are many of our Canadian SMEs that aren't even familiar with EDC. They're not familiar with the fact that we have an agency of government, an arm's-length agency of government that actually delivers financing solutions for their exports, that delivers risk insurance, that delivers receivables insurance.
Well, there are some that are. The banking institutions will refer EDC to them, BDC to them, but then when they start doing business with EDC, BDC, way too much paperwork, and they give up.
Actually, I haven't heard that, Mr. Pachetti. This is the first time I've heard that. In fact, what I hear more often than not from SMEs is that they value what the EDC brings to the table. Because as you know, let me finish. The EDC actually fills gaps that are left behind by the private sector banks and their financing solutions. And to have the EDC there actually plugging those gaps and supporting our SMEs is a real bonus. And by the way, the EDC is well known around the world, again, as perhaps the best agency and financing facility of its kind in the world.
Absolutely. It's not a criticism. EDC, BDC, great fan. I'm just saying if you want to increase your level of involvement from the SME market, you got to reduce some of the paperwork and infrastructure that's involved there. On another note, you spoke about trade being linked to investment, obviously goods, but I didn't hear anything about human rights. We had a bit of conflicting points of view when it came to human rights when we were studying the Honduras Free Trade Agreement. You didn't really mention anything about environmental issues when you do begin discussions with a country before beginning discussions in signing a free trade agreement with the country. So what's your viewpoint on those two items?
Well, as you know, Mr. Pachetti, that our standard trade agreements include quite robust provisions on labor and environment. One of the things we have very much focused on is engaging with countries that are coming out of very troubled histories. You mentioned Honduras. It's a great example. So is Colombia. By the way, Chile is also a great example of a country that has come a long ways since the Pinochet years, when it was a dictatorship. And it might surprise you to know that Canada's approach of actually engaging rather than isolating Chile caused Chile to be the first country to sign a free trade agreement, or Canada was the first country to sign a free trade agreement with Chile back in 1997. Today they have more free trade agreements than any other country in the world. Canada was on the ground engaging with them, not only on economic issues, not only on trying to improve their prosperity, which has actually happened, but also engaging on issues like human rights, democracy, on security, on capacity building. And that's exactly the approach we've taken in countries like Colombia, like Peru, and also Honduras, all of which have troubled histories.
No, and
we are part of the solution to that.
The question is that we've seen criticism from GMAT anywhere from, well, there's too many countries in it and not enough countries. And people or experts or witnesses have been all over the map, I think, on how they feel about the GMAP. So my question to you is that if you've just been to China, China seems to be a priority, not seem a priority, but when it comes to human rights, where do you balance your relationship or your future trading relationship with China?
Well, I can assure you, Mr. Pachetti, that when I visit China, and I visit China regularly, I engage with my counterparts not only on economic issues, we raise issues of human rights. I know every minister of our government that travels abroad regularly raises issues of human rights in countries where there are human rights violations going on. At the same time, I will again say this. We have made the decision to engage with countries like China, countries like Chile, countries like Colombia and Peru and Honduras, because we believe we have many of the solutions. As we engage with them, we're able to share with them best practices in areas such as human rights, such as labor rights, such as the environment. And in those countries that are impoverished, we also have the solutions by using trade and investment to raise the economic outcomes of the citizens of those countries and raise more of them out of poverty and into the middle class. That's what engagement is about, and I believe that we as a Canadian government do that effectively, and will continue to do so.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Cannon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Minister Fast and Ms. Bintoletto, for your appearing to our committee this morning. And as alluded to in your opening comments, Minister Fast, as we're talking about the Global Market Action Plan, or as you mentioned, a landmark plan to help businesses, Canadian businesses, to expand beyond the United States, where we've been sort of obviously concentrating for a number of years. We'll continue to be our best trading partner and ally, but we need to find ways to expand. And one of the initiatives, I had the pleasure and I thank you the opportunity to travel to Korea for the Prime Minister to the signing of the free trade agreement, opening the Asian market to about another 50 million potential customers. And one of the things I heard from investors on the trip, and we've heard for the committee and my constituents, is insurance when they're investing abroad is their protection of their investment. You alluded to the Foreign Investment Promotion Protection Agreement you recently signed with Benin, and a record amount. And one of the aspects is going into China, which is number 2 after the United States, and continue to expand. But one of the concerns of Canadian investors going into China is to ensure their investments protected. Can you maybe share with the committee the importance of the Canada-China FIPA and how that will protect Canadian investors?
Well, thank you for that question. Let me start off by saying that investment and trade are two sides of the same coin. Both of them drive economic prosperity here at home. When a Canadian company invests abroad, that also creates jobs here at home. And when we attract foreign investment from another country into Canada, that also creates jobs here at home. And so investment is a very, very part of our government's broader economic agenda. And the reason that we are negotiating bilateral investment treaties is because in many parts of the world, investors don't have the protection of the rule of law. They don't have regulatory certainty. They don't have transparency the way we do in Canada. And just a comment about Canada. When a foreign investor invests in Canada, once they're invested, we don't discriminate against them. We don't say, well, because you're a foreign company investing in Canada, we're going to treat you differently than Canadian companies. We treat them fairly. We treat them free of discrimination. That is not the case in many of our trading partners, which is why we negotiate bilateral investment treaties which set out a clear set of rules under which these investments will be treated once they've been made. And these investment treaties also set out a clear set of rules under which investment disputes are resolved. So, say Canada has a company that invests in another country. The investment is made, and now the government of that country discriminates against the Canadian company. If we have no investment treaty in place, there really is no protection. That company is at the whims of the domestic courts in that foreign country. But when we have a bilateral investment treaty in place, The Canadian company's dispute with that government is elevated out of the domestic context and into the international arbitration arena, where there is the rule of law, where there are clear rules, where there is fairness, and where you have independent, impartial adjudicators who decide on that dispute. And that's why we're anxious to negotiate more of these agreements. They are in Canada's own self-interest. We need to have them in place to protect Canadian investors, and quite frankly, Mr. Cannon, Canadian investors in Canada have been calling for these agreements, including the one with China, for a very, very long time, and now we're delivering.
Thanks for that clarity of the importance of the FIPAs around the world. One other area I'd like to talk about, something I'm passionate about, is education. And my colleague Randy Hoback, as the chair of the Americas Committee, and some of us in the Trade Committee had recently had an opportunity to go to Peru. And Mr. Pichetti talked about environmental issues from human rights. And Canada's leading the way in corporate social responsibility and the mining sector and some of these other areas that other countries we've gone to and heard firsthand. And one of the ways is through reciprocal education. I know that within the Global Market Action Plan, the GMAP, education is an important portion of the GMAP plan. And I know that the government understands the importance of the economy. I always think of my riding in Kelowna Lake Country. I have Okanagan College and UBC Okanagan, which has several international students. Has created a real diversity and ambience in our community that's helped from a cultural perspective and in a reciprocal way. So maybe elaborate a little bit as far as how education equals peace and opportunity, and the importance of GMAP and trade and commerce for Canada and international partners.
Great question. I'm glad you brought up international education. This is a priority sector for Canada. It's one of the 22 priority sectors identified under the Global Markets Action Plan. Beneath that plan, that umbrella, the Global Markets Action Plan, we've actually also released the International Education Strategy, under which we have set the goal of doubling the number of students from abroad that study in Canada over the next 10 years. Why is that important? Because when international students come to Canada, they, of course, enrich Canadian students because they're doing research in universities, they're working together, they're studying together. Of course, when these students go back home, they become some of Canada's best ambassadors. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the international education strategy goes far beyond just attracting foreign students to Canada. It's also about internationalizing the education of Canadian students. This strategy will have a focus on making sure that Canadian students, say at universities and colleges, spend at least 1 or 2 semesters abroad acquiring the skills, the language skills, the cultural skills, the business skills that will make them more valuable to their future employers, and that if they do become entrepreneurs and business people, will make them much more effective and successful within a globalized marketplace. The reality is we live in a global economy, and we're going to be more effective. Our Canadian students will be more effective if they actually diversify their educational experiences beyond Canada. So this is a two-way street. I'm pretty excited about delivering on this strategy.
Okay.
Thanks. I was just going to say I have a daughter just graduating, and she had the opportunity to spend a semester abroad, so I think it's great, the reciprocity.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to go into our second round of questioning, but before we do that, my information is the bells will likely start very soon. I just need unanimous consent to continue with the minister for a few extra minutes to get in the second round, if that's depends how long we go, but I kind of doubt it. But we need unanimous consent for that. Do we have that? Okay, very good. Mr. Davies, the floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Minister, China and the EU are clearly two extremely large and important markets for Canadian exporters, and I'd like to deal with each in turn, if I might. Respecting China, 2 years ago, your government concluded a FIPA with China and laid it on the table in the House in October of 2012. Despite the fact that it's been eligible for your cabinet to ratify it since November 2012, Your government has declined to do so to date. I understand that China has ratified this agreement, and we know that the Chinese government is very concerned about Canada's inability or refusal to do so. Can you explain to us why, after a year and a half, your government has failed to ratify the FIPA?
Well, Mr. Davies, I'm very surprised at your question. It was your party that opposed this agreement, and now you're asking us to rush it and bring it into force?
No, actually, we have concerns about it, but I'm just asking why you haven't done it, because you're in favor of it. So why haven't
I think
you
you
ratified
know
it? That's
very
the
well
question.
that presently there is a litigation ongoing with respect to that agreement. I'm not going to comment on the litigation itself because it's a matter before the courts, and I don't comment on matters before the courts. However, I will say this. Our government is fully committed to bringing this agreement into force. And again, I'm surprised that you would now be anxious to bring this into force when, in fact, it's your party that actually opposed this agreement.
Well, thanks, Mr. Minister. Again, we have concerns with that agreement. My question is just to try to find out why the government hasn't done it. So the Hupetchesett First Nations, we know, have challenged the FIPA on the grounds that it could affect their rights, and there was no prior consultation in accordance with their constitutional rights. And you've just confirmed that that's the reason that your government is unable to proceed with it. It's holding up the deal. So I want to turn to CITA. Considering that CITA is far larger than FIPA and has been called, I think you've called it, the most ambitious next-generation economic agreement ever negotiated by Canada, I'd like to know if you've consulted First Nations on CITA to ensure that it also won't be delayed and tied up for years in our court system. Have those consultations taken place?
Thank you for that question. First, let me respond that CITA is so much bigger than FIPA. They're two very different instruments. The FIPA is a bilateral investment treaty. It is not a market access agreement. Of course, CITA is a market access agreement in many, many different respects and goes far beyond that. Mm-hmm. In fact, you are correct in saying it is a very large agreement. It is the most comprehensive trade agreement that Canada has ever signed, that the EU has ever signed. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is the most comprehensive trade agreement anyone in the world has ever signed. It really does set the benchmark for the 21st century. In terms of consultations, as I've said in the House before, the negotiations for a trade agreement with the EU have been the most collaborative, the most transparent negotiations we have ever undertaken. There were broad consultations that went on for many years as this agreement was being negotiated. There were opportunities for anyone in Canada to provide input. And in fact, thousands of Canadians and organizations did provide input into our negotiations, in fact, informed the negotiations.
I'm sorry, I have limited time. But with First Nations is the question. It's the narrow question.
Yes, and I'm telling you, First Nations, as all other Canadians, had full opportunity to provide their input into these negotiations.
Thanks. Now, on CETA, Mr. Minister, you've talked before about how committed you are to transparency. What are the outstanding issues between Canada and the European Union currently that remain outstanding and holding up the conclusion of CETA right now? What are those issues?
Mr. Davies, what is happening right now is we are taking the agreement in principle that was signed in Brussels in October, and we're converting it into a legal text. Now, that legal text is expected to comprise of at least 1,000 pages. That's just English text. Of course, that will be translated into other languages, including our other official language.
Can I just clarify something, Mr. Minister? It's my understanding that there are still some substantive issues that are outstanding. It's not just at the text level, that rules of origin, some beef quotas and pork quotas, and some rules of origin issues still remain to be discussed. Am I incorrect in that, or are you saying that everything's been agreed and you're converting to legal text?
We'll let the Minister
Mr. Davies, all of the substantive issues have been resolved between Canada and the EU. What we are now doing is the technical work required to translate the agreement in principle into 1,000 pages of text. Now, you're a lawyer. You know that this doesn't happen overnight, and it's got to be done carefully. You don't do this on the back of a napkin. You don't do it in the corner of a bar. You put in the time to get it done properly so that it reflects the agreement that you made. We made an agreement in October. The substantive issues were all dealt with there. Now we're trying to put it into a legal text that actually reflects that agreement.
Very good. Mr. Hoback. The bells are ringing, so we'll close.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Mr. Minister, I want to compliment you. It's nice to see your enthusiasm and your passion for the job, and it really shows in how you go about conducting yourself and the work that you do. And I definitely hear that talking to business community and talking to people who have worked with you. And I compliment you on that and wish you keep it up because you're doing a great job. You know, one thing that this committee, I think, has been lucky to have been able to was go to Peru, not as a committee, but through Parlamericas, where we actually toured a Canadian gold mine and seen exactly how they operate on the field. And we learned some of the issues around Peru and some of the issues that are, you know, some of the human rights issues and growth issues that they're facing. But what was really unfortunate is this committee wanted to do a study of the Pacific Alliance and actually wanted to travel to the Pacific Alliance countries. And because of partisan NDP games in the House, you know, they basically, I'm not sure if it's because of the things that were going on in the House or the fact that they didn't want to hear the evidence of things that are happening in countries like Colombia because of trade agreements. Of course, we couldn't travel. So I wonder if you could just give us some overview of the Pacific Alliance and exactly how we're interacting there and just what it means for the region and why we need to be engaged, at least be at the table observing for sure.
Well, I'll give you a short answer on the Pacific Alliance. The Pacific Alliance, of course, is a group of countries, 4 countries, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, that have established a strategic trading agreement and trading alliance where essentially they have free trade amongst themselves. And that is to be applauded because Canada believes in trade liberalization. We have strongly supported those efforts, and Canada is actually an observer at the Pacific Alliance table. We engage regularly with the Pacific Alliance. These are essentially our most trusted partners in Central and South America, and so we work with them very closely. I did want to talk about Peru. Peru is one of those countries, since you mentioned it, that comes out of a difficult history where there were human rights abuses. It was a very poor country, still is fairly poor. Canada chose to engage. And we negotiated a trade agreement with Peru several years ago. And we've seen Peru make very significant strides, not only economically, not only in terms of the trade flows, improving prosperity of their citizens, but also in the area of democracy, capacity building in terms of security. And by the way, Canada continues to be a strategic partner with Peru in all of those areas. I do note that the NDP opposed that trade agreement. And yet, when we see the tremendous progress that has been made since that agreement came into force, it is just more evidence that Canada's trade plan is working as we engage with countries like that. And I know that Minister or
we're all allowed one mistake, Minister.
Yes, I know that Mr. Davies has visited Peru recently, and I believe came back with positive impressions. And I think, again, it's an indicator that when we do trade right, when we do it right, and we focus on it being a true partnership where we elevate our trading partner and we help them improve their economic outcomes and their democratic outcomes and their human rights outcomes, everybody wins. And Peru's just one example of that. There are many others I could mention.
That's the spirit you take into every trade deal, is it not? It's not one of just business. It's one of actually improving the lives of individual citizens in each of the countries. Is that fair to say?
That's true.
So when we look at example of Colombia and what's happening there, I think there's another example where you can look at where we've done a trade deal and the growth of the middle class, and the numbers are very strong and reflective. Would you comment any more on how we engage and how we get Canadian companies to really look at these markets and actually get them engaged?
Well, that is a challenge that I referenced earlier on in my comments. Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises, which is really our target now, because the big companies, they know what to do, they have the resources to do it, but it's our SMEs that really have great difficulty penetrating these markets because they are risk-averse, very cautious, and they're unaware of the tools that government is making available to them. And my role as trade minister, especially through the Global Markets Action Plan, is to actually promote those tools and to engage on a more persistent level with our SMEs across the country. I can't do that alone. We collectively in this room can't do that alone. We're going to have to work together with all of the key agencies, the industry associations in Canada, the accounting associations, make sure that we're actually communicating the information that SMEs need to make informed choices as they start to explore a plethora of export opportunities around the world.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Bencoletto. Thank you for being here. And Minister, thank you very much for your time. That takes us to the end of this session, and actually we're into the House, and for the committee's information, we will not only suspend, but we will adjourn this and pick it up on Tuesday. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.